I never expected that a simple discovery in my wife's bag would push our marriage to the edge, but it did. Catching them together only made things worse. When I got home from work that Wednesday evening, Emily, my wife of 10 years, was already waiting for me. She greeted me at the door and then asked me to sit down at the kitchen table, saying we needed to have a serious conversation. Instantly, I braced myself. Here we go again, I thought, another one of those tough talks. As I settled into the chair, Emily wasted no time. She started by reassuring me of her love and dedication to our marriage, but something about her tone made my stomach twist. I gave her a hesitant, okay, but before I could say anything else, she cut me off. Taking a deep breath, she got straight to the point. I love you, and I want us to grow old together, she began, but I've made a decision. I want to have an affair. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind stalled for a second, trying to process what she'd just said. I stared at her, completely thrown. So, let me get this straight, you love me, you don't want to hurt our relationship, but you still want to be with someone else? She shook her head slightly, as if I was missing the point. I wouldn't put it that way, she clarified. I've met someone, and I want a physical relationship with them. It wouldn't be anything serious, just occasional. And I promise to be honest about it. My love for you is strong enough that this won't change how I feel about you. If you really love me, you should let me do this, because it's something I need. She delivered this explanation with a confident smile, as if her logic was perfectly reasonable. My mind reeled. I don't see how this wouldn't affect us, I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. And have you already made plans with this person? Emily nodded. Tentatively, yes. We're planning a weekend away next week. Then, as if this conversation wasn't already surreal enough, she flipped the situation on me. How would you feel if the roles were reversed? She asked. I knew my real answer wouldn't sit well with her, so I gave her a measured response. As long as you promised it wouldn't change things between us, I'd be okay with it. She shot me a knowing look. You're lying. If I had been the one to suggest this, you would have lost your mind. I scoffed at that, shaking my head. So, you actually thought I'd just sit here and be fine with this? I asked. You really expected me to just nod and say, sure, honey, go enjoy your weekend with another man? Her confidence wavered for the first time. Maybe I didn't think this through well enough, she admitted. You're right, I didn't consider everything, even my own emotions. But if I say no now, would you still go through with it? She hesitated before answering. I honestly don't know. I didn't expect you to refuse. Silence stretched between us before she finally suggested a plan. Let's do this, give me a few days to think it over. We'll sit down on Sunday and talk again after I've had time to process everything. Tonight really caught me off guard. I couldn't even look at her. Without another word, I grabbed some of my things and moved into the guest room. As I walked past, Emily asked what I was doing. I kept my response short and to the point. I don't want to sleep next to someone who's more focused on another man than on me. I shut the door behind me a little harder than necessary, feeling the weight of the night settle onto my shoulders. Sleep didn't come easy, but at some point during the restless hours, a plan started forming in my mind. One thing became crystal clear: if she went through with this, our marriage wouldn't survive. The next morning, I stuck to my usual routine and left for work, though not a single word passed between us. When I got to the office, I made a quick call to my boss, letting him know I needed the next 2 days off for personal reasons. With that handled, I got to work, just not on my job. I started putting together my strategy. First, I picked up 3 voice-activated recorders and placed them in key spots: the bedroom, the car, and near the house phone. Then, I found a phone tap recorder for our landline. Next, I headed to the cell phone provider. Since the account was in my name, it was easy to get a copy of her phone records. Later that day, while she was still at work, I decided to dig a little deeper. I logged into her email, and sure enough, I found an account I hadn't even known existed. Cracking the password? A complete breeze. And what I found inside? Well, that was just the beginning. What I uncovered in that email account was eye-opening, though at least I could breathe a small sigh of relief. She hadn't physically crossed the line with him yet. That didn't make things any easier to swallow, but it did give me a little time to act. I discreetly set up the account to forward all incoming emails to me without leaving a trace. To round out my day, I secured a pair of small, easy-to-hide GPS trackers. These little devices were just what I needed. One would slip into her wallet, since she always carried her cash and credit cards with her, while the other would be tucked somewhere in her car. With everything in place, I had most of my surveillance set up ready. The last missing piece was access to her phone, something I planned to handle that night when the opportunity presented itself. As I continued digging through her emails, I quickly discovered a name that would become my new enemy, John Smith, a coworker of hers. Their email exchanges were frequent, filled with flirtation and plans, and they confirmed what I had feared. Despite my objections, the weekend trip was still happening. She had decided to move forward with her plan, no matter how I felt about it. By Friday, I knew what I had to do. I visited a well-recommended divorce attorney, laying everything out in front of him. I made it clear, I wanted to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, naming John Smith as the man I intended to sue. He assured me the process would be straightforward, as long as I could provide solid proof. That wasn't going to be a problem. I handed over the emails, phone records, and let him know I'd soon have audio recordings to add to the pile. The lawyer seemed more than satisfied with what I had gathered and wasted no time getting started. That evening, when Emily got home, I didn't acknowledge her. I sat in silence, giving her nothing, not a word, not a glance, as she moved around the kitchen, making dinner. When I couldn't stand being in the same space with her any longer, I grabbed my keys and walked out, heading to a bar for some food and a few beers. When I eventually returned home, she made another attempt to talk to me, but I didn't so much as slow my pace. I brushed past her without a word, went straight to the guest room, and shut the door behind me with enough force to make my frustration clear. At this point, there was only one way she could salvage our marriage: cancel her weekend with John. But I wasn't holding my breath. The rest of the weekend passed in complete silence. I continued to ignore her, making sure she felt the weight of her decisions. By Sunday afternoon, I decided it was time to put everything on the table. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where she had blindsided me with her request days earlier. I didn't sugarcoat my thoughts. I've thought this over from every angle, and no matter how I look at it, I can't make peace with it, I told her. You keep saying this won't affect our marriage, but it already has. It's obvious. You're upset. I'm furious. Our entire dynamic has changed, and nothing has even happened yet. If you had really taken a moment to consider my perspective, you might have seen this differently. She frowned, her expression turning defensive. If you love me, how can you be so selfish? I let out a humorless laugh. Selfish? You're calling me selfish? You're the one who wants to sleep with someone else while staying married to me. That sounds pretty damn selfish if you ask me. Her expression hardened. And what if I go through with it anyway? I didn't hesitate. Then there will be consequences, I said firmly. We made vows 10 years ago, to be faithful. That still means something to me. She took a deep breath, staring down at the table before looking back at me. I know, she admitted. But this is something I have to do. I nodded slowly. Then I guess this conversation is over. You should really think long and hard about what you're throwing away. Without waiting for a response, I got up and left, taking my laptop with me. I found a quiet spot where I could monitor her emails without her knowing. Not long after, I saw the final confirmation: she was going through with it. She emailed John, furious that I had refused to accept her plan. His response was enthusiastic. He reassured her that everything was set. He had already booked their room at the Hilton in Kansas City for Friday and Saturday night. They were practically making this easy for me. Without hesitation, I went ahead and reserved their room for Thursday night. If they thought they were going to slip away unnoticed, they had another thing coming. As I continued reading, I saw them ironing out the rest of their romantic getaway. Dinner, dancing, and, of course, intimacy. Emily even mentioned she had bought new lingerie just for the occasion. I sat back, staring at the screen. She wasn't even trying to hide her excitement. That was fine. Let her think she had it all planned out. Because now, so did I. I grabbed a quick bite while keeping a close watch on their email exchanges. It was clear that my refusal hadn't slowed them down in the slightest. They had completely moved past it and were deep into finalizing their plans. Check-in at the hotel was set for 3 o'clock on Friday, so John was planning to pick her up at 1 p.m. The drive would take about 2 hours, and they wanted to arrive as early as possible. What really caught me off guard was his willingness to pick her up from our house. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. I had to figure out how I wanted to handle that. Did I confront him? Did I make a scene? Or did I let him waltz in and take my wife like I was some kind of fool? While I mulled over my next move, I went ahead and booked a room for myself at the same hotel, close enough to theirs that I could intercept anything I needed to. Over the next few days, I methodically gathered everything required to catch them red-handed. A couple of small fiber-optic HD cameras, barely noticeable, would do the trick. My plan was to install them in the room Thursday night, ensuring that by the time they arrived, everything would be in place. I wasn't going to leave a single shred of doubt when it came to proving my case. Through it all, I maintained my cold silence toward Emily. I refused to engage, refused to acknowledge her, and by the time Wednesday rolled around, I knew it was time for her final chance. That evening, I told her to sit at the table. She hesitated, clearly uneasy, but after a moment, she complied. "Have you thought this through?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She nodded, not an ounce of hesitation in her voice. "Yes. I have. And I've decided to go through with it." She had no shame in telling me that her weekend with John was still happening. Incredibly, she even expressed hope that we could somehow move past this. I let out a long sigh, shaking my head. "This is your last chance, Emily," I warned her. "You're about to throw away a decade of marriage for one weekend. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want?" Her response was firm. "Yes." That was all I needed to hear. "Then you've made your choice," I said, standing up. "You're choosing him over me." I walked out, slamming the door behind me just like I had so many times before. This time, though, it felt different. This time, I knew for certain that whatever love we once had was dead. Thursday morning, I went to work as usual, but only for a few hours. I put in a request for the afternoon and the following day off to finalize my plans. My boss, clearly sensing something was wrong, didn't ask any questions. He simply nodded and told me to take whatever time I needed. That afternoon, I drove to Kansas City, checked into the very room John had reserved, and went straight to work setting up my surveillance. I positioned the cameras carefully, double-checking their angles and making sure everything was functioning perfectly. Once I was satisfied, I tested them, moving around the room to ensure they would capture exactly what I needed. It was flawless. The setup was complete. Before leaving, I took a walk down the hall past their room to test my monitoring range. It was well within my reach. Everything was falling into place. On the drive back home, I found myself thinking about how surreal all of this felt. In a matter of days, my marriage had gone from shaky to completely unsalvageable. There was no way back from this. But before the weekend kicked off, I had one last errand to run. I stopped by a gun store, not for a weapon, but for a small can of pepper spray. It wasn't meant for protection. It was meant to ruin their date. When I walked through the door that evening, Emily was in the kitchen, watching me expectantly. Maybe she thought I had come to my senses. Maybe she thought I would plead with her one last time. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I walked straight past her without a word and slammed my door behind me. Minutes later, she followed, stepping into my room, trying to sound friendly. Trying to act like things were normal. "Save it for John," I told her flatly. "I don't need your pity." I turned my back to her, making it clear the conversation was over. After a moment, she left, and I finally had the room to myself. Sleep didn't come easily that night, but that didn't matter. Everything was ready. The stage was set. Friday morning, I got up, got dressed, and left the house at my usual time without saying a single word to Emily. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, signed the divorce papers, and made sure everything was in order. "I'll have all the evidence ready by Monday," I told them. "I want her served at work Monday afternoon. And John, too. I'm suing him for alienation of affection." The lawyer nodded, making note of my request. It would all be handled exactly as I wanted. With that taken care of, I checked Emily's GPS tracker. She was at the hair salon. Perfect. I returned home and went straight to her suitcase. Unzipping it, I rummaged through her neatly packed clothes and found what I was looking for, her brand new underwear, no doubt bought specifically for her little weekend getaway. I held them up for a moment, shaking my head. She had gone out and picked something special for him, something she had never done for me. That was fine. Because by the time I was done, that lingerie wasn't going to be nearly as enjoyable as she had planned. The lingerie she had picked out was undeniably seductive, but the sting of knowing she hadn't bought it for me was sharp. It was a shame, really. Once, she would have gone out of her way to look this good for me, but now, all that effort was for another man. That was fine. Slipping on a pair of rubber gloves, I carefully lifted her new underwear from the suitcase. With precise, deliberate movements, I sprayed the crotch of her panties and the cups of her bra with pepper spray before neatly placing them back where I found them. This weekend was going to be unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. With that small act of sabotage complete, I moved on to the next part of my plan. I headed to the bank and closed out every joint account we had, transferring the money into a new account under my name alone. Next, I canceled every credit card that had both our names on it. By the time she realized what had happened, it would be far too late for her to do anything about it. Feeling more accomplished than I had in days, I drove home, ready to bid farewell to the woman who had once been my wife. By 12:30, I knew she'd be upstairs, putting herself together for him. I stepped inside the house, but the downstairs was silent. No sign of Emily. As expected, she was in the bedroom, getting ready. I climbed the stairs and pushed the door open without knocking. There she was, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the lingerie I had once bought her. The sight of her caught me off guard for a moment. Her new hairstyle, flawless makeup, and that enticing outfit, she had gone all out for him. When she noticed me, she instinctively tried to cover herself, but I shook my head. "Don't be ridiculous," I told her. "It's not like I haven't seen it all before." She hesitated, then dropped her arms. I looked at her, taking in the effort she had put into this moment. "You look incredible," I admitted. "It's just too bad you never put in this much effort for me." Emily met my eyes through the mirror, her expression unreadable. "I just wanted to feel good about myself today," she said softly. I let out a quiet scoff. "No, you wanted him to think you look good. That's what this is about. Not once have you ever gone to this much trouble for me." She turned to face me fully now. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. I needed this." I sighed, shaking my head. "You've always been beautiful, Emily. You didn't need to change anything for me. I loved you exactly the way you were." Stepping closer, I reached for her left hand. Her eyes flicked down as I gently slid off her wedding ring. "You know, when I gave you this ring, it meant something," I told her. "It symbolized a promise, to forsake all others. But apparently, that promise didn't mean as much to you as it did to me." She stayed silent. I pocketed the ring and then removed the engagement ring as well. "This was my mother's," I reminded her. "It stays with me." She looked stunned for a moment, but she didn't argue. She didn't fight me on it. She just stood there, watching as I took back what was mine. "I won't be here when he arrives," I told her. "But I want to be clear, he does not come into this house. You leave with him, fine. But if I find out he stepped foot inside, I will do something about it." Her brow furrowed. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I confirmed. "I promise you, if he walks into my house, I'll make sure he's never desirable to another woman again. Do you understand me?" A flash of fear crossed her face, but she nodded. "I won't let him in." "Good," I said. "Because I'll be watching." She swallowed hard, then asked the question I had been waiting for. "Why are you acting like this?" I met her gaze, my voice calm but firm. "Because the love of my life just destroyed that love," I said simply. "I hope your weekend is worth what you're losing." Without another word, I turned and walked away. She called after me, her voice rising with anger, but I didn't turn back. I was done. I parked down the street, making sure I had a clear line of sight to the house. If she so much as let that bastard inside, I'd be ready. Soon enough, his car pulled up. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched him walk up to the door and ring the bell. Emily stepped outside, suitcase in hand. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even look back. Instead, she set her bag down, wrapped her arms around him, and kissed him, long and deep, right there in my driveway. And then, as if to twist the knife, she turned her head and smirked at me. John picked up her suitcase, and she slid into the passenger seat, still grinning. As they drove past, she shot me one last smug look. I flipped her off without hesitation, and just like that, her expression soured. The satisfaction I felt at wiping that grin off her face was the only bright spot in an otherwise miserable moment. Once they were gone, I drove home and got to work securing what was left of my house. I changed every lock and reset the garage door code. There would be no coming back for her, not now, not ever. Then, I grabbed my suitcase, already packed, and headed to Kansas City. After checking in, I went straight to my room and set up my laptop. The camera I had installed was working flawlessly. I adjusted the angle and took a seat, waiting for the inevitable. It didn't take long. Emily and John arrived at the hotel, and within minutes, the footage made it clear, they had wasted no time. Emily made the first move, her body language unmistakable. And John? Well, let's just say he didn't last long. I couldn't help but smirk as I watched him emerge from the bathroom, completely naked, looking every bit the fool I had expected him to be. This was going to be fun that I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Watching John strut around with his, less than impressive equipment was just too much. Emily had been with me for years, she was used to a lot more than what this guy could offer. Not that it seemed to bother him. After a brief trip to the bathroom, John climbed back into bed, eager for another round. Emily smiled at him, arms open, ready to play the part of the devoted lover. But when she reached down and got a handful of his reality, I had to stifle another laugh. He didn't have to pace himself, that much was obvious. If she could actually feel anything at all, I'd be shocked. Wow. She had really downgraded. Her face, though, that was priceless. While she tried to keep up appearances, I could see it, the slight furrow in her brow, the barely there hesitation. The frustration creeping in. She wasn't thrilled, that was for sure. John, completely oblivious, powered through another attempt at proving his worth. The result? A solid 4 minutes before he was rolling onto his back, catching his breath. 3 rounds in, and she was still nowhere close. This was turning out even better than I had imagined. At that point, I decided I'd had my fill for the night. I shut my laptop and headed out for dinner and a couple of drinks, leaving the cameras running to capture every moment. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was making sure Emily had no way to deny what she'd done. By the time I returned, the show was over. John was fast asleep, dead to the world, while Emily lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. Frustrated. Unsatisfied. Regretting her choices, maybe? I smirked. This was fun. Once I got past the initial sting of losing her, I realized just how much entertainment I had ahead of me. Tomorrow? That was going to be even better. I thought about the gorgeous women I'd seen at the bar earlier, the ones I'd soon be free to pursue, and I drifted off to sleep with a satisfied grin. No more heartbreak. No more second-guessing. My path was clear, and I knew exactly where I was headed. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. A hot shower, a hearty breakfast, and a quick stop for some snacks later, I was ready to have some real fun. I picked up my phone and made a call, to a florist. I ordered a bouquet, the same kind I used to get Emily for our anniversary. Since there would be no more anniversaries, I figured she should take a moment to reflect on what she was throwing away. The flowers were set to be delivered at 11 a.m. The timing? Didn't matter much. What did matter was the message they carried. Turned out, the timing was perfect. At some point, they left the room, probably to grab food or kill time. But when they returned, they wasted no time picking up where they had left off. Clothes hit the floor, bodies tangled together. John was just getting started when, knock, knock, knock. The delivery had arrived. Emily sat up, confused, and answered the door. When she took the bouquet from the florist and read the card, her entire face shifted, from surprise to confusion, then to anger. She stormed back inside, snatched her phone, and within seconds, my cell started ringing. I answered on the second ring. "Hello," I said casually, already knowing what was coming. Her voice was sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" I leaned back, grinning. "Oh, not much. Just sitting here, wondering why my wife is off on a romantic getaway with another man." Her tone was dripping with irritation. "Why do you even care?" I chuckled. "Well, I got a surprise today, flowers. You know, the same kind I used to get you for our anniversary. Naturally, I was curious about what you were up to." Silence. "Wait, you think I sent them?" she finally asked. I let out a low laugh. "Let's be real, Emily. First of all, you and your genius boyfriend went out of your way to keep me in the dark about this little trip. Second, if I had sent you flowers, they wouldn't have been roses." I let my words linger for a second. "They would have been ragweed," I continued. "And the card? It would have read, 'To my cheating wife.'" She sucked in a sharp breath. "Not so nice, huh?" I added. "Then again, neither is running off with Johnny Boy. But hey, maybe those flowers will help you realize just what you're throwing away." I didn't wait for a response. I simply hung up. Her call came again immediately. Then again. And again. I let it ring. Eventually, she gave up. A few minutes later, she turned to John, no doubt relaying everything I had said. He, ever the supportive homewrecker, reassured her that I'd eventually get over it. That everything would settle down. He couldn't have been more wrong. Emily still seemed rattled, but after a while, she started giving in again. As if trying to force herself to enjoy what she had left. But we both knew, deep down, she had made a colossal mistake. And I wasn't even close to being done with her yet that I figured it was time for another little surprise. So, I ordered Emily's favorite pizza and had it sent straight to their hotel room. The timing was perfect. Just as John was getting back into action, there was a knock at the door. John, clearly annoyed, opened it, only to be greeted by a delivery guy holding a steaming pizza. He tried to refuse, claiming he hadn't ordered anything, but the delivery guy wasn't having it. He rattled off the room number and John's own cell phone number, confirming the order. When John still resisted, the guy even threatened to call the cops if he didn't pay up. Defeated, John reluctantly handed over the cash. Since they had already paid for it, they figured they might as well eat. So, they sat in bed, munching on pizza like it was just another normal afternoon, completely oblivious to the fact that I was orchestrating every inconvenience they encountered. Once they were done eating, they chatted for a while, but it wasn't long before John's hormones kicked back in. He started making his move again, and just as things were heating up, knock, knock. This time, a sandwich. Emily's favorite sandwich. The moment she saw it, her entire expression changed. She knew. She turned to John, realization dawning on her face. He knows where we are. John, clueless as ever, just blinked. What? She exhaled sharply, putting the pieces together. I told you he probably hacked into my new email. He must have seen where you mentioned the hotel. John still wasn't convinced, but Emily knew me better than that. Trust me, she muttered. This is exactly the kind of thing he'd do. With their mood thoroughly ruined, they decided to get dressed and leave the room for a bit. They planned to go out, get some fresh air, and then return later to shower and get ready for their big romantic date. Emily reassured John that she'd make it up to him that night. I sat back, grinning as I watched them leave. I was laughing so hard that tears rolled down my face. She had no idea what was coming next. That evening, they returned, showered, and got dressed for their night out. Emily slipped into some lingerie, giving John a little preview of what he could expect later. He tried to make a move right then and there, but she insisted they needed to leave. She wanted the full date experience first. I wondered how long it would take for my little gift to kick in. She finished getting ready, looking fantastic. It was almost tragic how much effort she was putting into a night that was about to go so wrong. Off they went, completely unaware. I settled in, eagerly waiting for their return. Sure enough, about an hour later, they were back. But instead of seductively slipping out of her dress, Emily bolted for the bathroom. I smirked. Right on schedule. She hopped into the shower and stayed in there for an awfully long time. When she finally emerged, she was wrapped in a towel, her face twisted in discomfort. Her chest and crotch were bright red. Painfully so. John, ever the optimist, tried to get frisky again, but she shut him down immediately. I'm in pain, she snapped. Not now. She chalked it up to some kind of allergic reaction to her new lingerie. If only she knew. Meanwhile, I spent the evening organizing all my video footage, ensuring every detail was saved and ready to be handed over to my lawyer, and, of course, John's wife. With everything prepared, I called it a night. It had been a spectacularly productive day. Trouble was brewing in their little paradise. And I was the one stirring the pot. Sunday morning, I packed up and headed home. Emily was in for a world of trouble when she got back. When John dropped her off later that day, he didn't even bother walking her to the door. He just pulled up, let her out, and drove off. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I sat on the couch, eyes glued to a football game, not even bothering to acknowledge her arrival. She walked in, standing directly in front of the TV, forcing me to look at her. With a sultry smile, she said, "Well, I thought you might be happy to see me. Considering, I'm not dead." I didn't even blink. "What gave you that impression?" I asked flatly. "Do you think I've suddenly become stupid?" Her expression faltered, but she quickly recovered. "No, I don't think you're stupid. I thought maybe your love for me was strong enough to move past this." That actually made me laugh. I shook my head. "Oh, I did love you. Completely. But that changed the second you left with him." Her lips parted slightly, as if my words had truly stunned her. I leaned back against the couch, my tone unwavering. "I begged you not to do this. I poured out everything, told you how much I loved you, and it didn't matter. You left anyway. And the second you did, I stopped caring whether you came back." She looked completely thrown by my response. "I just can't believe you feel that way about me." I met her gaze, my voice firm. "Believe it." I shook my head. "You've made a huge mistake, Emily." She swallowed hard, then hesitated before asking, "Is there any way we can move past this? I'll do anything to fix things." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Anything?" I asked. "How about you get down on your knees and apologize?" Her face twisted with indignation. "I can't do that," she snapped. I sighed, already expecting that response. "Yeah, I figured as much," I muttered. "And that just proves my point. Your promises to save our marriage are just as worthless as the one you made on our wedding day." She was quiet for a moment, then took a step closer. "I was thinking about you all day," she admitted. "I want to be with you tonight." I scoffed, my voice ice cold. "Now you need me?" "Sorry, but I don't think so. That's not happening." She frowned. "Why not?" I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Tell me something, Emily, did little Johnny use protection every single time?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said. "But he's married, and I can't have kids." I let out a sharp breath. "So what? You think that makes it better?" I shot back. "Do you honestly believe you're the only one he's been with like that? You're damaged goods now as far as I'm concerned. I'm not touching you until you get a full clean bill of health from a doctor. And even then." I shook my head. "I don't do seconds." Emily stiffened, her expression turning defensive. "I know he's clean," she argued. "But if you don't trust it, we can use protection." I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Right. You expect me to use a damn rubber with my own wife after she just spent the weekend raw with that guy? No, Emily. Screw you. You chose Johnny over me. I can't stand to look at you right now." I grabbed my keys. "I'm going out for a while." She flinched. "Where are you going?" "Anywhere but here," I muttered. "And tonight?" "You're sleeping in the guest room. The master bedroom is mine. Unlike you, I didn't do anything wrong." She held her ground. "We can talk about this when you get back from work tomorrow." I turned toward the door. "I don't see what's left to talk about." I walked out without another word, heading to a bar and grill to grab dinner and clear my head, not that I needed clarity. I already knew exactly what I was doing. I just needed some distance from her. I wasn't much of a drinker, so I stuck to my meal, then took a long walk before heading back home. When I walked through the door, I knew something was off. I made my way to the bedroom, and sure enough, there she was, lying on my bed like nothing had changed. I stopped in the doorway, staring at her. "Get out." She sat up, folding her arms. This is our bed. I have just as much right to be here as you do. I took a step closer. The hell you do, I snapped. You gave up that right the second you got involved with Johnny. So you can either get out, or I'll throw your stuff out, and then you onto the street. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She slowly climbed out of bed, brushing past me as she walked toward the hallway. As she left, I shut the door behind her, and locked it. I could still hear her crying as she walked away. The next morning, I completely ignored her. We ate breakfast in silence, and when it was time for her to leave, she paused at the door. She turned back to me. "I love you," she said softly. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "I loved you too," I said, making sure to put emphasis on the past tense. I watched as her face crumbled. She turned and walked out, and the second the door shut behind her, I got to work. I grabbed every single piece of her clothing, every little personal belonging, and stuffed them into garbage bags. Then I made a call to Johnny's wife. When she picked up, I asked her a simple question. "Do you know where your husband was this weekend?" She didn't. She thought he was away on a business trip. "Well," I said, "I think you should see something." I offered to provide her with all the evidence. She didn't even hesitate. "Yes. I want to see everything." An hour later, I was standing outside her front door, evidence in hand. When she opened it, I was stunned. She was gorgeous. For the first time in a long time, I actually stammered. Sorry," I muttered. I wasn't expecting you to be." I trailed off. She raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me to be what?" I cleared my throat. "Beautiful." She blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I shook it off and got back to business. I handed her the files, explained everything, the emails, the footage, the whole pathetic weekend. She was furious. And when I told her about my plan to divorce Emily, she had a plan of her own. "Take me to your lawyer," she said. So we went. The attorney was more than willing to take her case, even offering a discount since he was already handling mine. As she filled out the paperwork, I asked him a quick question. "Do I need to wait to serve Johnny to protect her?" He shook his head. "As long as she signs first, she'll be fine." That was all I needed to hear. Once her divorce papers were ready, we grabbed lunch together while we waited. And for the first time in days, I felt really damn good. After she signed the papers, I dropped her off at her place and headed home, waiting for Emily's inevitable call. I was supposed to update her later that night, but she didn't even give me the chance. My phone rang around 3, her voice already laced with anger. "What the hell is this?" she snapped. "I just got served with divorce papers, and John got hit with a lawsuit. What the hell are you doing?" I smirked, settling into my chair. "Seems pretty straightforward to me," I said casually. "I warned you there'd be consequences for your little weekend adventure. Looks like you didn't take me seriously." She let out a bitter scoff. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with this." I shook my head. "Maybe you should have listened instead of letting little Johnny fill your head with nonsense," I shot back. "But let's not do this over the phone. We'll talk when you get back to my place." And with that, I hung up. I wasn't going to waste my breath on her outrage. Instead, I gathered up her belongings, stuffed them into garbage bags, and tossed them all onto the front lawn. I knew she'd come in hot, and I made sure to have everything recording, just in case I needed proof for a restraining order down the line. It didn't take long. The moment she pulled into the driveway and saw her things scattered across the yard, she lost it. She exploded out of the car, screaming incoherently, spit flying from her mouth as she raged like a storm. I stood there calmly, watching as she vented. When she finally took a breath, I cut in. "If you want to talk, then calm down, I said coolly. We can have a civilized conversation, or I'll pack your things into your car, and you can leave. Her face crumpled. Tears welled up in her eyes. I never thought you'd do this to me. I let out a dry chuckle. Do this to you? I repeated. You foolish woman, you did this to us. I told you not to go through with it. I begged you. I pleaded with you not to destroy our marriage. And you did it anyway. So tell me, why would you ever think I wouldn't file for divorce? Her lip trembled. Because I love you, she whimpered. I let out a slow, heavy sigh. I did love you too, I admitted. More than anything. But you broke me, Emily. You shattered my heart, and now? I can't live with someone who has so little respect for me, who thinks so little of me. Tears streamed down her face. Why do you keep calling him little Johnny? I crossed my arms. Because I saw what you were working with, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened. That's right, I continued. I had cameras in your room, Emily. I saw everything. And the first time I got a look at his underwhelming package, I laughed so hard I cried. I shook my head. I couldn't believe you left me for that. Her face burned with embarrassment. I smirked. And from what I saw, you weren't exactly satisfied. Not like you were with me. She swallowed hard. We made love, she whispered. And I'll probably miss that. I shrugged. Look at it this way, I said, leaning back against the doorframe. You've got your freedom now. You can be with whoever you want. You can have a new man every night if you want. She shook her head, fresh tears falling. I don't want that, she admitted. I want you. Only you. I stared at her for a moment. Come inside, I finally said. Let's sit down for a few minutes. She looked surprised but followed me in. We sat down at the kitchen table, just like we had so many times before. But this time was different. This was the last time. The realization hit me hard. Emily looked down at her hands before finally speaking. You wouldn't actually hurt John, would you? I leaned back in my chair. Why not? I said evenly. He destroyed our once happy marriage. I think he should pay. She inhaled sharply. But don't worry, I added with a smirk. He's not getting a divorce, by the way. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I chuckled darkly. His wife already knew about the lawsuit before he even got served. She understood what was happening. And you know what? I leaned forward. She agreed to let him keep his marriage. So while you're here, all alone, he's going back home to her. Her face crumbled. And for the first time, I saw it, regret. It was too damn late for that. Emily narrowed her eyes, her voice laced with doubt. Do you really believe that? Or is this just some elaborate trick to make me look bad so he can be with you? I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. I spoke to his wife this morning. I showed her everything, the emails, the footage, the proof. Meanwhile, he fed her some story about being away on a business trip. I leaned back in my chair, watching her process that. Now? They're sharing a lawyer, and we even got a discount. Her face flickered with something, regret, maybe. She hesitated before speaking. I wish you had been honest when I first asked how you'd feel if I wanted to be with another man. You know you would have gone crazy. I exhaled, my patience wearing thin. And that's exactly why we're getting divorced, Emily. You still don't believe me. Even now. But honestly? I don't care what you believe anymore. When you call him later, you'll find out the truth. He's been shown the door just like you. Her expression faltered. So you're really kicking me out? Yes, I said simply. The night you dropped this bombshell on me, I went to the guest room to think. Within an hour, I knew I wanted a divorce. The next day, I bought the equipment to gather evidence. By Friday, I was already sitting in a lawyer's office, making it official. She bit her lip, her voice quieter now. Why didn't you tell me? If I had known, I might have reconsidered. I let out a humorless chuckle. Too late for that. Is there any chance you could forgive me? She asked. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Emily. I loved you. So much that maybe, forgiveness could have been possible. But last night was your last chance, and you let it slip away. And even if I could forgive you, I could never trust you again. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. I'd spend every day wondering when you'd do this again, I continued. And I won't live like that. It's better if we end this now. Tears slipped down her face, and for the first time, she didn't try to argue. I pressed on. Unlike you, I've put a lot of thought into this, and every time, I come to the same conclusion: I'm divorcing you. And I'm making sure John pays for what he did to our marriage, too. She sniffled. What am I supposed to do now? I shrugged. Call him. Maybe you two can share a place. But don't bother trying to use your credit cards, I've cancelled them. I left half the money in our checking account, but my name is off of it. I'll split our savings with you, too. Her face paled, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. You can keep your car, I went on, but the payments are your responsibility now. You can take all your clothes and personal items once you find a place. Any furniture you need, fine, take it. But the house? It's mine. If I decide to sell it, I'll split the proceeds. It's all laid out in the divorce papers. She wiped at her eyes. And if I contest it? I leaned back, my voice calm but firm. Then I use every piece of evidence I have, and I promise you, it won't end well for you. Silence hung between us. She swallowed, nodding slowly. I won't fight it. This is all my fault. I just wish I could undo it. I sighed, shaking my head. Well, I said, smirking slightly, do you know the difference between a cheating wife and a light bulb? She blinked at me, confused. What? I smirked. You can't have a romantic relationship with a light bulb. Her expression remained blank, unimpressed. Not funny? I asked, feigning disappointment. She wiped at her eyes again. I'm not going to argue. This is all on me. I just wish I could turn back time. I stood up, nodding toward the door. Well, it's time for you to go. Tears welled in her eyes again as she watched me gather up her remaining belongings, hauling the last of them to her car. Once everything was loaded, I reached into my pocket and pulled out one final item, her wedding ring. Or, what was left of it. She gasped as I placed it in her hand, the once perfect circle now flattened beyond recognition. You can sell it for scrap, I said flatly. Her hands trembled, her lip quivering as she stared at the ruined ring. I stepped back, hands in my pockets. Goodbye, Emily. And without another word, I turned and walked away. I let out a quiet breath as I placed the flattened ring in her palm. It's just scrap gold now, I told her. Sell it. Get whatever cash you can. She stared at it, her fingers trembling. I reached for the car door and closed it, sealing our final moment together. Then, for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Goodbye, my love. With that, I turned and walked away, back toward the empty house that no longer felt like a home. I didn't watch her drive off. My vision was already blurred with tears. The moment I stepped inside, the weight of everything hit me at once. I sank onto the couch, buried my face in my hands, and let it all out. I cried, Hard, for what felt like an hour, until there was nothing left in me but exhaustion. Then, reality set in. I had choices. I could drown myself in alcohol, but I'd never been much of a drinker, and I hated the way it made me feel afterward. That was a dead end. I could end my life. But that would mean giving Emily the ultimate victory, letting her destruction of our marriage destroy me, too. That wasn't happening. Or I could pick myself up, knowing that I had done nothing wrong, and move forward. I wiped my face, inhaling deeply. The house felt lighter without her in it, the air a little clearer. That alone brought the faintest smile to my face. Straightening up, still holding that small smirk, I grabbed my phone and dialed a number. Emily picked up after the first ring. We made dinner plans. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe I just needed the closure. Maybe it was part of my healing process. Or maybe, somewhere deep down, I was trying to remind myself that life wasn't over. As the evening approached, I called again to confirm. We finalized the details, and something settled in my chest. I was moving forward. Maybe we'd stay friends. Maybe I'd meet someone new. But no matter how much I tried to push her from my mind, her image still lingered, like a ghost of the life I had just left behind.